Hey everyone, Andrew Southworth, GeneverStudios.com, here to teach you how to make better music and help you achieve your musical goals. This video is super exciting because it's a video collaboration with a friend of mine who goes by BigJerr on YouTube. You might have seen him around. He's an Ableton Certified Trainer. He does courses with, I believe it's Evenant and Warp Academy, and he's done a bunch of other cool things. I'm going to have a link in the description so you can check out his channel. We're doing an experiment in this video where it's called Musical Pen Pals. Basically, it's an idea I found from Adam Neely and Jeff Schneider, who they do this thing where like one person writes a part of a song, they send it to the other, they work on it, and they send it back and forth, you know, like pen pals. And since me and Jerry live in different states, it's kind of the exact same situation where we're sending it, you know, across the world and work on it back and forth. So that's what we've done. And this is part one of this. It's a pretty long video, so we split it into parts. And the next part's going to be on his channel. So I highly recommend you subscribe to Jerry. And check out his content because he does a lot of cool things that are related to what I do. It's kind of all music production, but he's like an expert when it comes to like electronic music and of course Ableton Live and sound design. So I highly recommend you check out his content, and that's also where part two is going to be. And let's just dive right into it. I'm super excited and I hope you enjoy it. All right, so as I mentioned, this is going to be completely impromptu and I have no ideas at the moment. I think I want to record a couple acoustic guitar noises and use them to create instruments inside using like samplers and stuff like that. All right, so I'm going to get a sampler. I'm going to zoom into this waveform and just chop that guy out just a little bit better. Go to sampler and I'll just drag this puppy in, and now I should have a keyboard, and I'll set this to E because the original note was E, so I would probably have the octave wrong. Oh yeah. Now I have a bass sample, so I'm going to turn it into a sampler, consolidate, and drag that on, and that is an E as well. Now I have a bass. I think I have a groove that I want to do, so I'm going to turn on the metronome. Too fast. Alright, cool. So I'm going to loop that, enable that, and then click record. So I have some idea of a kind of a lead melodic line, so what I'm going to do is put some filtering and echo on, and I'm just kind of jam over this for a little bit to get an idea. I think I like it. I don't think I'm actually going to tweak it. So and I'm going to just do a little bit of mixing here just to get the sounds how I want them. The last element I want to add is some kind of pad element. I'm keeping the song structure very basic and very kind of empty because what I'm going to do is I'm going to export these as stems, send to Jerry, and he's going to take it from there. So I'm just kind of making broad ideas at this moment because he could change the tempo of this, he could repitch everything, he could cut chunks and rearrange things. So I'm trying to not get too detailed as much as I want to, but I'm going to make a pad out of this guitar sound. Right, so as much as I want to go ahead and just finish this entire song right now, that's not the point of this experiment. I'm just leaving things long enough so that there's good loop points for Jerry to pick out, and there's a couple different musical elements around the same theme. Chord progression is E minor, C, D, and then E minor, G, D. And yeah, it's gonna turn out awesome. So Jerry, back to you. Can't wait to hear what you're gonna do with it.
All right, I just got my project file from my buddy Andrew, and I'm excited to get started on it. So I looked through the project, and I'm really stoked on what he did. Very creative, and I love watching the video, all from acoustic guitar. So what I'm going to do is take a quick second and get these sounds pumping, and then we'll continue with the sketch. All right, I already had a pretty good starting point, but we did polish these a bit. So here's what these guys sound like. Okay, then the ARP. And then the chords. Super sick. Really pumping now. Let's start producing. All right, so first thing we need to do is add some drums. So let's create ourselves a little loop here. We could always rearrange stuff. And I like to just start at measure 9. I don't know why. I mean, ultimately it's because normally there's an intro there. So let's go ahead and start bringing in some drums. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and go into my user library, and I've got my brand sounds right here. So I recommend all you guys do this. So here's my kick and snare that I like to use. So there we go. And let's do a quick pattern. And all right, we'll just move this guy here. Something like real simple for now. And then, you know, we could build on it. Cool, love it. Best drum beat ever. Cool, let's get a quick level happening here. Awesome. Great. So now let's continue adding some stuff to this guy here. So I'm going to go ahead and continue building from my sample library. I got a nice open hi-hat that always works really well. Let's get this guy going here. Okay, and here's a cool trick for you guys. I want this to be like quarter notes or eighth notes. Actually, eighth notes. So what we're going to do is we're just going to Command J this, consolidate it, and then we're going to loop it and pull it out. So now we've got this guy happening. Wicked. And finally, I want to add a sub to match my bass. So I have my standard sub right here, my all-purpose sub. Let's bring them in, and we'll copy down the MIDI. Let's get all that junk out of the way. Maybe just a crash. All right, and maybe a quick drum fill. As you guys know, me and Andrew are pretty metal, so I had to break out the 9-string. All right, let's check out the guitar that we laid down. So here it is. So we got low and we got high. Let's take a listen to it and then I'll solo it. Bitchin', we are on our way. Last thing I want to do is lay out a little bit more of an arrangement to lead my buddy Andrew into his next pass, all right? So let's go ahead and arrange this out a little bit. So it seems to me like this ARP needs to kind of introduce the track. And again, Andrew can change any of this if he likes. And probably only one, right? So let's actually take this whole thing here and move it over. Slide it over there, okay. And we could take our drum fill probably and utilize that over here. All right, this is a great place to pass it back to my buddy Andrew. We got a nice intro. We got a nice rock out chorus core part. I'm going to leave the verse up to him because he'll probably be singing, and then I'll take it from there. All right, guys? I'll see you and Andrew on the flip side.
All right, it's Andrew. I am back. Jerry, that was freaking awesome. And you notice in the corner of your screen that you're going to see me recording vocals. And the reason for that is originally I was like, I'll just capture the whole process live. But the problem is that ends up being like 45 minutes to an hour of me just making weird noises and tweaking effects back and forth. It's not very entertaining to watch, so I didn't want to put you through that. So I have the vocals imported here, and I want to show you how I process them, all the layers that go behind what I tracked, just so you can understand the process, and then we'll send it over to Jerry. So Jerry drastically expanded the song, which gave me a good structure where I could actually define a chorus, kind of like an intro chorus and a verse, and then I just layered on top of that bass with these extra effects. So basically this group here is my main vocals. I go into background vocals in this group, and then I have a section or group for screaming. And the reason I do this is because it allows me to do bus processing on each of these layers, which gives you a lot of potential to glue those layers together. And that's very important when it comes to processing vocals. You don't want it to sound like a stack of vocals. You want it to sound like a cohesive vocal track. So, and then it also allows me to just highlight these three groups, and I can go into File, Export, and then export those individual groups as files for Jerry, so he doesn't have to deal with all these vocal tracks with separate processing. Makes it a lot easier, and this is a good technique when you're working with somebody else. So I'll go through the lead tracks first, and I'll play it with the music just up front. And I'll show you a section of the verse. I'm coming down, I'm slowing down, I'm picking up pieces, and then I have this kind of screaming tie-in to the actual chorus. I think you have the answer. I think you have the answer. I think you have the answers. I think you wanted them alive. I'm picking up the pieces. All right, so let's dive through each of these layers one by one. So first of all, we have this these main vocal layers, and so there's the intro part and there's the chorus part. I'll use the chorus part as an example because, as you can see, they're on the same track, therefore they have the same processing. So if I solo this, I'll do just the lead layer. I think you have the answers. I think you wanted them alive. And my standard vocal stack, if I need waves tune or any kind of tuning, that's what I throw on. So waves tune is just, it's kind of like auto tune, except it allows you to go in and move everything individually. And the green or the orange lines represents what I actually sang, and the green represents what I pitched it to. So there's certain spots like right here where I didn't go high enough, and so that just pitches it up, and it's generally on, which means that it's going to sound pretty good once it's pitched. You want things to be as close as possible before you're going to pitch them. Pitch correction should really be about getting into the fine details, not about making like a horrible take sound great. Otherwise, it's going to come out like crap. So that's the first stack, the first plugin in pretty much all these layers. Next, I typically will do Virtual Mix Rack by Slate Digital. And one reason for this is I have their virtual microphone system. It's actually what I'm recording my talking through in this video also. It's a great microphone, but the idea behind it is that it's a very linear microphone that connects to this software, and the software can simulate a whole bunch of different microphones, and they sell expansions so you can get different microphones. So for like $1,000, which is not too much for a microphone, you can replicate thousands of dollars, like over 10 grand of microphones. So it's a cool thing. Now the other reason I do this is because it lets me set my volumes with this trimmer. I can do some EQ up front, and then I can do a kind of a hard compressor, or I can do a compressor that rides the whole take, and then I can do a compressor that just hits the hard points. And when I play this, you'll see these needles moving, hopefully. I think you have the answers. I think you wanted them alive. So this left one is just riding the whole take to really flatten out all of the dynamics, and this one is just hitting the peaks at a much higher ratio, just because there's some parts where you hit it really hard, and you don't want those to like slip through, because this is only going to compress so hard. And I could drive this one harder, but that introduces more artifacts than having a second stage in your compression. Now, next I go into Nectar III, which is an isotope plugin. It's kind of a whole vocal suite. You can even do pitch correction in this. It's more of an auto-tune type thing, though. And the biggest reason I use this, or a couple biggest reasons, the main one is this harmony thing. So I can add an octave down that tracks with the vocal. And I can also add these unisons. So it's a way of doing stereo spread inside of your take. Now, these vocals are double tracked, so these layers have the exact same plugins on them. And this one's panned to the left, this one's panned to the right. So basically you just record the same part twice, and it gives you a lot thicker and a much wider stereo spread on your lead vocal. It's a very, 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 very common vocal technique. But this allows me to put extra layers inside, so I have even more unisons. So this is just the left take.
I think you have the answers. I think you wanted them alive.
And, oh, sorry, I messed it up. This will be just the left take.
I think you have the answers. I think you wanted them alive.
And so by doing this, I have a thick vocal sound on both the left and the right, and I have this octave down, which adds a lot of thickness to that lead line. I don't have a very deep voice, and often in cases like this, it really thickens up the sound. Now, another technique is to record an octave down, and in some of the harmonies, I do have a mixture of harmonies and octave down layers. So it's really just about adding thickness when it comes to that. I do have this EQ thing, but it's not really doing much. Then we go to the de-esser, which is critically important, and this just takes out some of the S sounds that can be very harsh when you're listening to music.
I think you have the answers.
So you see when I said answers, it really dropped down and just compressed those higher frequencies.
I think you have the answers. I think you wanted them alive.
And then I add another stage of compression. I don't always pull it down. It just depends on the vocal take. In this case, the threshold isn't set, so it's really not doing anything. And that is all that's happening on the actual individual lead vocal lines. Now, I do also have this bus stack of plugins here, and this is Neutron. Here, I believe I'm just providing some bus compression and just making sure that I'm cutting out some of the lows that really don't exist in the vocals. And then I'm cutting out some harsh frequencies I found by just sweeping and seeing what was harsh in the ears. And this is just some compression that will hit the whole stack to glue it together.
I think you have the answers.
This is a little harsher than you would typically do for a glue compressor. Although it depends, it's all about you just listen and tweak, and when it works, it works. So I do a de-esser on the whole bus. This, you don't have to do this. I just did it in this case. I do a limiter to just kind of squash everything above a certain volume.
I think you have the answers.
And this really helps make the vocal sound in your face when you're hearing it with the track. And the last thing I did is I just threw a reverb with a certain mix. Often what I'll do is I'll make a separate bus, and I'll be able to mix it in separately and then export it separately. But in this case, I just combined it, and it worked perfectly fine. Now next, I'll show you the verse, because this is where things, I think, get a little more fun in terms of the different layers. Now, the verse parts are essentially identical in the lead lines to these other lead takes. So when it gets a little more interesting, I'll mute the audio here, is when it comes to these, not harmonies, but call and response things.
I'm picking up the pieces.
So in particular, there's this harmony here.
I'm picking up the pieces. I'm picking up the pieces.
And the processing for that is pretty much identical to the lead lines, but the bus processing is where it gets a little bit different. Typically, I will add a little more reverb, and I'll make the decay pre-delay bigger so that it sounds further away. So it sounds more like, again, it's far away. And then sometimes on the actual mix bus, I'll do different things. In this case, it's exactly the same, but another technique can be to squash the dynamics of your background vocals a little bit more, because you don't want them to stand out too much, and so squashing the dynamics can help that. And this is all by ear. So in this case, it's pretty much the same, but keep that in mind as another technique you can use. And then this little thing is a little bit different. It's just a call and response thing that I did.
I'm picking up.
And the vocal stack is identical to all the rest, except before the virtual mix rack, I add this little altar boy plugin which is just a way of controlling pitch and formant. So if I loop this a little bit better, so it lets you do some cool things with pitch and then of course formant. And I just did this to make it sound a little more feminine, I guess, or boyish. And I don't know, it's something I do in a lot of my vocals just to add a little bit of extra character, I guess. I like it, so that's why I do it. But that's what's happening there. And then the last little bit of the vocal processing, then we'll let Jerry get these stems, and you can see what he does, is the scream processing.
I think you have the answer!
And this is not too different from what I do for the rest, except it's simpler. Obviously, there's no waves tune because there's no pitch to the screams. In this case, I have an EQ here, but it's not actually doing anything. I often will put an EQ there because in a lot of cases you'll use an EQ, but I just have virtual mix rack, and I have the exact same setup that I use for all the other vocals. It's no different. Sometimes I will have to tweak the compressor threshold to different levels, and you might tweak the EQ differently, but in this case it's all the same. The big difference comes in the bus. If I open up this Neutron plugin here, everything's pretty much identical. Like I'm scooping the lows. I didn't have to filter out those harsh frequencies because it's not singing. So usually when you're singing, you're moving all these notes and frequencies around. It creates harmonics. And screams just kind of have a white noise harmonic effect. If I show you the EQ spread of that,
I think you have the answer!
it almost looks like white noise, which is one reason why you don't have to filter out some of those harsher frequencies, although, you know, it all depends on the song and the sound of your voice, and Jerry might end up doing that later anyways. Now, the biggest thing that I love to do in screams is to add Decapitator. Now, Decapitator is made by the same company that makes Little Altar Boy, Sound Toys. I freaking love their plugins, but Decapitator is one of those, like, super secret sauce plugins. And you can use this on anything. There's a lot of great presets. Often I'll just open up a preset and tweak the distortion and the low cut and the high cut and the mix and get a sweet sound. So, but using it on drums is great. Using it on guitar can be great. It works great on everything. It's just a saturation plugin. That's all it is. But it has all the thickness, so I'll turn it off and let you listen. Also, I'll turn off the reverb.
I think you have the answer!
Super dry. Now I'll add the distortion.
I think you have the answer!
Adds a little bit of thickness, and then I turn on the reverb, and it'll add some depth.
I think you have the answer!
And the reverb settings are just, I just throw on a lead vocal thing and get the mix right in terms of the wetness, and that's it. So the vocals, they're pretty standard for me. If you've ever seen me walk through some of my vocal stacks, this is pretty much what I do in every song. The only difference is a lot of cases, how much tuning you're doing, how much compression, EQ you're doing, what layers, and how much de-essing are you doing. And then when you process the bus, it's more about how it sits in the mix. In this case, I'm just recording on top of Jerry's layer, and then later on I'm going to be handling the mix, so I just did kind of like a generic kind of thing. But if you're mixing into a track, you'll get more into the nitty-gritty of Neutron and change the EQs around, and then you'll change the dynamics and the limiting, and then the reverb to just sit in your mix better. But we'll be handling that later. So I hope you found this helpful. I'm going to hand this back to Jerry, and he's going to do something awesome. And yeah. Right. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed that. That was part one. Part two, as I mentioned at the beginning, is going to be on Jerry's channel. I'm going to leave links to subscribe right here to both my channel and Jerry's. Make sure to ring the bell on both to stay notified. And also when part two comes out. And then here I'm going to link some other videos that you might like. So thanks for watching. See you later.